Well, thank you for joining us. I have a very special guest right now, Senator Tim Scott, dear friend, representing the state of South Carolina here in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's good to be with you.
It's good to be here, but we're here for a specific reason.
Yes.
It is an anniversary coming up of a horrible tragedy in your state, in your town. So I want to talk to you about that. Before I do, I have a question I want to ask you.
Yes.
Because upon you arriving here in Washington, D.C. in 2011, first you were in the House, then you went over to the Senate, and you exhibited some real passion for the folks that are living in our most distressed areas.
Yes.
The Opportunity Zone initiative that you did in 2017, you got that into the tax bill so that there'll be attention focused in these communities across the country. The policing reform that you're working on currently. What's driving this passion? Why is it that you are so involved in making sure that the little lost sheep is getting the attention that you're giving them?
I think Matthew 25 is pretty clear on the fact that we have a responsibility and an obligation to use our resources and our talents in a way that serves the least of these. And I can't think of a better category of people that need help than the ones that are listed in Matthew 25. And as you think through that, then the question is, if you want to hear Matthew 25:21, well done, my good and faithful servant, how do you get there? Well, I think you put your attention on the people that need it the most, that may not have the voice that others can afford to send a lobbyist here to lobby. We should be passionately in pursuit of excellence for those folks who have unlimited potential, but they perhaps sometimes lack access to that potential. And so what we should do is bring the resources and the opportunities back to the neighborhoods where folks like me and many others, and maybe you, grew up in those communities. We recognize the level of talent and potential. The question is, can we bring a conservative, consistently conservative message and frankly, policy agenda for those folks to the Capitol and then back to their homes?
So you seem hopeful that the ecosystems can be in place, and so then when you combine public policy with deep concern about these communities, that they could flourish like the rest of Healthy America?
Well, they do flourish, frankly, and one of the beautiful stories of the American dream is, number one, it's subjective. You decide what the American dream is for you, and number two, you get to pursue it passionately, and if we do what we're supposed to do, we're getting government further out of the way, and then we're allowing for the marketplace and education to work in ways that produces the type of results that all Americans should celebrate. And if we don't, then we are part of the problem. So I'd rather be a part of the solution than part of the problem.
Well, I thank you for that, and I think a lot of other people do too. So now I want you to talk to me about Charleston. Talk to me about the church massacre. It occurred 6 years ago this week. 21-year-old racist, confused, horrible hatred. He went into a black church. Those were your friends.
Yes.
He went in, he killed 9, wounded 13. It's very difficult to wipe back the tears for not just yourself and not just for those that are that were impacted, but for the leaders that had to come together and try to make a clear message for the nations. Walk us back in there. Your friend Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley, they seized that moment. They finally brought down that Confederate flag that was over your state house there. Your friend in the Senate, Jim Langford, flew into South Carolina to be there by your side. Can we recover? Was that a moment that we as a nation could have captured and should capture?
Well, I think it's a moment that we did capture. I mean, bottom line is what you saw from the 9 members of the family of those who were murdered in church in the middle of a Bible study was the greatest act of unification you'll ever see, at least in our state's history. And that is when 9 family members spoke from Matthew 5:44, a message of forgiveness and a message of hope. I remember talking to Daniel Simmons Jr. when he said about his father's loss that Romans 8:28 is alive and well, that we know all these things will work together for the good for those who love God and that are called according to their purpose. So having a message of loving those who are your enemies and praying for those who are persecuting you, and coming to a conclusion very quickly that forgiveness is the only way forward. It is impossible not to hear the message delivered by those 9 family members and not be hopeful. It is also impossible for such a message of forgiveness and unconditional love not to be embraced by a nation and a world hungry for the truth. Those family members provided the truth.
They did, and they and still are. I mean, the recovery has to still be going on even 6 years later, but when we look a year before that, we saw Michael Brown, it erupted in riots. When we look now, last year, and what happened after the death of George Floyd, we saw the whole society unravel. How are you now saying that this was good, that we could grab, that the nation could learn when we haven't? What in the world do we need to do so that people can reflect on this moment?
Well, there's no doubt that there's nothing good about the murder. There's something good about the outcome. There's a scripture that also says that be thankful in all things, not for all things. There's a huge difference between those two words, in and for. Yeah, listen, Clemente Pinckney, the pastor of the church, state senator, was the first guy to call me senator. He was the person who...
Now, you didn't work with him in the state house, but you knew him well, and then he was in the...
Yeah, we were in the General Assembly together.
In the General Assembly together,
He was in the Senate, and I was in the House. But more importantly, we were just friends. He was the pastor for my late uncle. My late uncle was in Emmanuel AME Church for 50 years. So I had been in those doors. This is less of a political opportunity, less of a moment of national reflection. This is a moment of personal pain and then reflection.
And I'm just wondering if we all can get there to walk through it, because as you pointed to, it was not just that moment of pain or to say murder, this is yuck, but you guys seem to be on a path to recover. Immediately they moved to forgiveness. How do the rest of us get there so that we stop seeing this tension in our society when it comes to race matters?
I think the important point is to have, really it starts with inflection. Most of the time, people want someone somewhere else to do something that they themselves need to do first. Forgiveness is the beginning of healing and restoration from the inside out, not from the outside in. Sometimes I think we mistake the call for forgiveness as a sweet thing to do. Actually, it is the greatest therapy for the person who suffers the most from that loss. And so that's why it's such an important first step. But the second step of forgiveness is reconciliation. And our state, after seeing such an act of forgiveness, wanted to see reconciliation happen. The fastest path to reconciliation is on the heels of forgiveness. And for our nation to embrace the concepts that we saw on display for the world to see 36 hours after their family members were without mercy killed and their lives destroyed, was for them to look in the eyes of the murderer and say, we forgive you. But not only do we forgive you, but we see the ability to reconcile not you with us, but you with God.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're still hoping that that'll happen, because we see that he's appealing. The federal government did find hate charges against him and it sentenced him to death. And it'd be interesting under the Biden administration if they're going to carry that through. But I really want us to focus, I know we have very limited time, on how do we, or can we, as a nation, heal ourselves? There's always going to be some radical racists out there that wants that kind of war. What do we, and particularly those of us in the Black community, do? Some are saying, well, we're tired of forgiving. We're tired of forgiving. Can we get past our past and walk into that kind of healing? It's obvious, because you go into South Carolina, you guys are flourishing. God's hand is on that state.
No doubt about it, but just remember that the fact of the matter is that just a few months before Clemente Pinckney and the 8 parishioners lost their lives, Walter Scott was murdered in the streets of North Charleston, shot in the back by a police officer. So you're not asking the question of a community that went through one atrocity over a decade. You're talking about a community that within 2 months went through 2 of the worst situations ever, and the nation erupts around those cases every single day. It did not happen in Charleston.
No, it didn't.
And the reason why,
and you're talking also about where the Civil War started, so we can go all the way back in history and say
the reason why it didn't happen in Charleston, though, is because we actually practiced what we preached. Everybody benefits from that. I benefit from that example. Leaders didn't suffer through that situation. We had an opportunity to hold hands and lead through that situation because somebody else suffered through it. We didn't suffer like the family suffered. We didn't see the loved ones that we care about the most lose their lives. We should follow those examples, and when we do, there is a remarkable reconciliation that is possible But without that forgiveness, there is no reconciliation. And yes, you can figure out a political solution to this. It just won't work.
It's not going to work.
It's a
But you
condition
guys
of the
were
heart.
the examples. It is a condition of the heart. When you look at the Lindsey Graham, your friend, going on national TV and say the flag has to come down. I mean, we were talking David Beasley when he was governor. They removed him when
Yes.
he wanted to remove the flag, but 20 years sooner. And then you have Nikki Haley in her moment saying, "Let's do this together as a community." What would you say to those that are now in their community? A final word from you, that are struggling to get to that place of forgiveness, that will put down that anger that keeps rising up every time we see an incident. As you pointed to, you just had a horrible tragedy of that shot in the back, and it was on film, and that's the only way that we knew what really happened there.
Well, unforgiveness does more damage to the container than it does to anything outside the container. So remember that forgiveness is about you, not about them. Number two, what they say and what you say says more about who you are than who they are. So when they say something about you, they're really reflecting what they think about themselves. So our nation wins when we recognize the fact that we all are sinners saved by grace. We are flawed individuals with an amazing promise in our future. The key for us is to recognize that, to focus on it, and do something about it. The most important thing you can do is deal with you, and then your family, then your community, then your city, then your state, then your nation, not reverse it.
Not reverse at all. And it sounds like if we put that in that order, we would have a very limited role of government. So we just thank you for the work that you're doing and the example that you're giving to all of us in the nation. And we're so sorry for your loss. And I'm so glad that we were able to sit down just to mourn with you and to re-enter that moment this week that many in your city and your state are thinking about.
Well, thank you, sir, for what you're doing too, because so often we reflect on the terrible atrocities of history without learning the lesson of progress. This gives us an opportunity not only to remember, but then redirect. And in that redirection, we'll find hope.
We will. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Senator.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You're not going to get a better word than that. And we're going to keep Charleston in our prayers during this week. And we're going to keep the great state of South Carolina in our prayers this week. And we're going to look at them as an example of where the rest of us can go if we're really trying to find health and healing. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.